Hello and welcome to Coach Talk, the show more interested in ideas and philosophy than facts and history. My guest this week is Simon Cox. Simon was an international rower, winning gold at the '94 World Championships. He then transitioned to coaching and later into a performance director. As well as in Great Britain, he worked on Olympic projects in Switzerland, Australia and the Czech Republic before moving into esports. Simon is someone everyone in esports should listen to. Not only does he have a huge amount of experience, but it's also in a role that we often underconsider or completely ignore in the space. We talked about how to set up a structure from scratch, how to come into an existing structure, especially an expansive one, and the areas that esports missed in its fast maturity. A lot of the topics here are continuations or expansions of a talk he gave at last year's Esports Performance Summit. You can find the talk in full for free, link below. And if you want to see the rest of the talks from people like Isma at G2 or Bernadette, who's now at Team BDS, you can follow the link below as well to buy the full VOD library. This episode is once again brought to you by Quickfire.gg. So for those that don't know, Quickfire is a coaching platform that alongside payments, scheduling and practical things, makes tools for coaches. You can set up live VOD reviews, anchor your messages to specific timestamps in videos for future use, and even set up auto-tracking of goals with the Riot API. I understand that learning a new set of tools can be daunting, but with coaching as competitive as it's becoming, anything we can do to set ourselves apart is a fantastic opportunity. While I was working even in the LEC, I was just using a pen and paper, but I'm old and the scene was less competitive then. So now is as good a time as any to add something new to what you offer and make it as clear as possible for your players. So if you're interested in checking out coachify.gg, you can do so with the link below. They have a bunch of free options which I suggest you check out first, although there are extra tools more catered to teams behind a paywall. If you do decide to look into Coachify, please drop me a message on Twitter and let me know your feedback as we're working together to try and create the best possible tools for coaches. Lastly, if you enjoy this episode, please like, share and subscribe. And if you're interested in exploring mentoring or any of the other things I do to support coaches in the scene, follow me on Twitter where you can find all the other links that you'll need. And now, without further ado, Simon, what is coaching?
It's an interesting question. There's a lot of sort of easy answers, and I guess start with those, and that you're facilitating someone's dream. I think is perhaps the way of doing it, and around that, there's a lot of areas. You're a teacher, you're a mentor, you're a friend, you're a colleague, but also coaching, you take on a responsibility to create something, and I think that responsibility is something that some people weighs very heavily, in others they take it very lightly, and it's a sort of two-way thing, how the person or the people or the team or the environment you're coaching, how they perceive things and how you set the culture up, I think changes very much how you coach. So to me, coaching is sort of you're an enabler, is how I very much see it, and that means you're giving, and a coach has to be able to give pretty freely with a lot of their life, and it's we'll touch on it. It's pretty unglamorous in many ways because you're the giver, and that requires putting yourself in a position where it's not about you. And if it's all about the coach, it's gone wrong. And it's finding that balance of where do you sit yourself. I think football's an easy example, isn't it? There's a lot of coaches where it's the coach that's the figurehead, and the team sort of comes behind. Now, is that wrong or right? It's sort of a mechanism that can work. So I think answer your question, there's a lot of very different ways to coach, but to me, coaching is enabling. You're actually trying to enable a performance of some sort.
And you mentioned there it's facilitating, but also responsible at the end of the day, which is a bit of a straight, because if it's not entirely on you, because it comes from the performer, obviously is the one who does the performance, but at the end of the day, it's also still your responsibility, which is why I guess some coaches have a tendency to make it a bit more about them because they have all this responsibility. Do you think that's fair, or do you think people come in with thinking that that's the best way?
Yes, in a way it's fair. I mean, we laugh about it, and when the team wins, they've done great. When they lose, it's the coach that messed up. It can be quite brutal in that way, and that's part of stepping into that environment. So I think one of the mechanisms for making it easier for the team is to take that sort of the public load on yourself as a coach. Actually, okay, it's all, I'll take all that, but then finding that balance to, okay, they have to perform and around that, what you've given them to perform, how do you balance that, sort of taking the pressure away and being the sound, the voice, the personality of it, but still allowing them the floor, if you like, to perform. So it's certainly a balance, and coaches find different ways to deal with that.
So I want to touch on, for people watching who aren't familiar with you, what is your background, and have you got to this stage to be starting to be involved in esports, or not starting to, but to be involved in esports?
So some time ago, I was an international rower in sport that way. I then moved into coaching and management, based in the UK. Worked my way up through the various levels of coaching in the UK, running bigger and bigger clubs, running high performance centres, and then stepped into the international scene in Switzerland, where I was out there for 8 years, and then ended up running the Olympic programme and setting up the structure and system in Switzerland, with a good colleague and friend as well. And then moved to Australia, where I did a similar thing with a very different setup, an organisation running the national team there, part of the national rowing team, and then into the Czech Republic, where I was the performance director, and that was really setting things up in a very challenging environment there. And from that into esport, it's about 4 or 5 years ago now, just as the whole pandemic sort of kicked in, which is an interesting time to be working in that. That's sort of the journey, if you like.
And did you start your coaching in rowing, or did you go straight for other things?
Yeah. No, it started in rowing. That was where I started.
Okay, as I mentioned to you before, I'd really like to explore kind of each of these stages with the idea of having almost a different purpose of exploring each one. So you mentioned that when you went to Switzerland, you were sort of setting up a new structure. So very, very broad question. How do you start setting up a new structure of that kind?
I think it's a common theme that'll probably come through our talking. It's really, what is your end goal? And that's almost the toughest thing. Everyone's, I want to be world champion, I want to be Olympic champion, I want to be the best. It's like, okay, well, it's a easy phrase, but actually, if you really want that, and that is a goal, then the structure is relatively straightforward. Okay, we can build a structure that will enable that to get there. Now, whether you do or not, that's the joy of sport, and things go wrong and you fix it on the way. But it's really building a structure fit for purpose. And it's then, to me, a lot of the coaching skill is matching that structure to what's in front of you. Everyone wants to coach Messi, Ronaldo, the greats, but the reality is there's only one of them, and you're not coaching them. So don't try and have a structure that imagines you are. You have to coach what's in front of you, and a lot of that is to my mind where coaches go a little bit off track, in that they see something that looks great, or let's do it like them, and without actually seeing the fundamentals of what are they doing and why. And I think that's a lot of the key. So how do you set up a structure? Well, it's recognizing where you are, where you want to get to, and effectively joining the dots. And you can't join the dots without the first dot, and you have to build from that beginning. It's very easy to throw money at things and get the 2%ers, the 1%ers, this is what we need, without actually fixing the 95, 96, 98%, which is the same for everybody. You have to do that groundwork. So a lot of what I did in Switzerland was establishing the benchmark groundwork of, okay, what are the fundamentals, which are the same in any sport, any esport or whatever it is. What are your fundamentals? What are the non-negotiables. Okay, well, you have to be able to commit enough time. You have to be able to take away the distractions, if you like. What are the barriers to actually committing that time? And then you have to put in markers, if you like, of is what you're doing working? And I think that's a lot of the question in esport, where the tendency is, well, we just play. Okay, well, that's great. But what we're talking about here is actually trying to be the very best, if that's what we are talking about, because that's then a different step to being good. It's actually being the best, and that can be very awkward and very different. And we are looking at the tiny percent outliers. Your bell curve. We're looking at the ones that don't fit. And when you try and put a structure together for the ones effectively that don't fit, if I use that phrase, you're then creating a lot of stress for the rest of the bell curve, because it's not normal for them. So I think the key to any structure is to really understand what it's for, and then you can put the bits together. What are the fundamentals? What do you really need? What equipment do you need? What do you really need for equipment? Actually, what are the I do talks and things, and one of my favorite slides is just a pair of muddy trainers. Okay, well, what do you need to get fit? Well, actually, that's all. That and your body weight, and you can get very fit. And then you can build gym membership and all the rest, and everything else on top. But actually, what do you really need? And the same in esport. What do you really need? Well, okay, I'll have a good connection. I might not have the best mouse pad, everything else, but actually fundamentally, I can play. And how far can you get with that before it's worth spending money for the upgrades, for everything else? So I very much worked with, you had to justify the upgrade. Had you done everything, got everything out of what you've got before, let's move on. Now, technology and everything else, of course it's helpful and useful, and it's not, we have to go backwards with it, but you have to sort of earn that right for it to be of value to step forward. There isn't an easy route.
I love that justify the upgrade phrase. We'll come on to this a bit later, but I think one of the things that's so strange about esports is the development of the space, where we went from absolutely nothing. When I first got involved, the idea that you would even do this as a job was ridiculous. I never considered it. So when people ask me, why did you want to get into esports? It wasn't a thing that you could get into. And then we suddenly went to, not anymore, but almost all the money that you could ever want. And this idea of justifying the upgrades, or even justifying the extra people that we brought on, I think was sort of completely missed. One of the things that you said at the beginning, you said, make sure you have like an end goal. What mistakes do you see that organizations make around that, having that goal? Because I don't know, maybe this is even wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like most organizations, if you asked them, they would say they have a goal, but mostly it's just kind of to win or to do as well as we can. So what mistakes do people make around that very first step?
I think, to me, perhaps mistake's not the right word. It's the real understanding of what that actually means, because it's, of course we all want to win. It's great. There's no issue there, but it's actually, what does that mean in terms of timescale, commitment, the reality of it. I want to be a world champion. Okay, well, that means you're not going to see your mates for birthdays. You're not going to go out to the pub. You're not going to, your sacrifices. And I think I mentioned this to you before. How strong is your why, and is the organisation's why strong enough? Oh, well, actually, we want to win everything. Well, yes, it's nice, but is your commitment to that strong enough, because it's sport, to go through the ups and downs that you're going to have? The tendency, you picked up on it, the speed with which esport exploded. We have a slightly different phrase. It basically sort of missed puberty. It didn't have those growing pains. It just went from zero to a monster. And now it's sort of reeling itself back in. And actually, okay, we've got to look at why we're doing these things. And is that value for money? And does that work? The tendency is still just to try and buy the best player, and that'll fix it, rather than actually, well, that's a sticking plaster as opposed to a structure that will create results and stability and steps forward. And I think, as you picked up, there's a lot of tremors at the moment on people who haven't got that right, and it's built on sand and it's wobbling around that. And those that have actually got a structure of, okay, how do we bring a player through? How do we actually create a structure that gives us the knowledge that we're getting it right enough that we will win, because we've created that, rather than, well, we've just cherry picked and that doesn't work, we'll cherry pick some more, and that doesn't work, we'll cherry pick some more, and then you end up with where are you going? There's some very clear examples of orgs who've tried to do that, and it just isn't working.
And I guess this doesn't happen as much in sport, although it might. What would you do if you're coming into an organization and their goal is just simply not possible in your estimation? So let's say you're going to the Swiss Federation, and the idea is, they say we want to be the best Olympic country in the world, and I mean, maybe you think it is possible, but you would think that places like China have an advantage just on number of people. So what would you say to that if you were coming into an organization that what they want to be their goal just can't align, in your estimation, with other factors that they can't control?
I think you put it there as the end goal, and then it's creating the stepping stones on the route. And what's really key is that there is an enjoyment and appreciation of the route, and that's the bit that a lot of people miss. And if you don't enjoy that process with all the ups and downs on it, then it's actually never going to work, because there's going to be ups and downs in that. So, for your example, okay, you want to be that. Now we can set a pathway out to that, which would mean starting a talent ID program, and a junior and a youth and a development and everything else working through. Fine. Do you have the time and money to commit to that? And time is a lot of it. If we use that example, which Olympics are you expecting that? Because it's not a quick process. And then it starts to work its way forward. If you've got it right and the process is productive and enjoyable, if I use that word, then it's working. You're actually en route. Now, in any sport, whether you get there is of course the ultimate goal. You win or lose. But actually, having set up that process, you've then got a structure that enables it. And you do need some, like in sports, some stars to align and some things to happen. But also, it's picking your market, if you like. Okay, you want to be the best in a sport. Well, what versions are there? In esports, there's a lot of options to be world champion. There's a lot of different games, effectively. So tactically, what do you want to target? Okay, to be the world champion, LOL. Okay, that's a bigger challenge, if you like, just in sheer numbers and where it is, than, I don't know, Rocket League, where it's not so much easier, but actually the steps to get there are smaller. The top talent is very good in everything, but it's actually, it is pick your target, and actually look for that, rather than, I want to win the World Cup in football. Well, okay, that's a very big thing, and I think that is one of the areas that traditional sport is starting to recognize a little bit in esport. To be a world champion in esport, you really are. You're taking on millions, if not billions, of people. To be a world champion swimmer, well, the population who actually have access to a swimming pool is relatively small, and so to me there is quite something to be able to be, the LOL world champion. You have beaten anyone who has a PC, effectively, or even now a mobile phone, if you get into that side of things. So it is an immense challenge with that.
So do you think, I mean, the thing with these goals is that, for me, there's always some sort of balance where it has to be an incredibly ambitious goal. If it's a goal that we're almost already at, then it seems less productive. But also, the thing for me is it's always difficult to marry the like realisticness of it to the ambitiousness of it, if that makes sense. So just using the example of League of Legends, there has never been a Western world champion, except the one time where only the Western teams are allowed to play. And so to have the goal as a Western team of winning the world championship, in a sense, that's crazy. And a lot of people will say it's sort of too ambitious. And there's many advantages by simply being a team that plays in China. You play in a setup that has way more competitive games, which is probably useful, but also you play against the best, and you don't in Europe because of the ping. You can't play across, all that kind of thing. And when people say that to me, I have a lot of sort of sympathy for it. But on the other hand, we do see examples of that kind of thing happening where, I'm a cycling fan. So Team Sky coming into the Tour de France saying we're going to win in 5 years, and a British rider has never won. Yeah. It doesn't seem more ambitious than saying a Western League of Legends team is going to win. But how do you start to sort of bring those two together? So Switzerland is not going to be the best Olympic team in the world, I would say. Is that fair?
Well, actually, if we're talking rowing, there is a way you can be, because the way it is, there's lots of different sorts of boats. So to be the best Olympic team, I think if you have 6 athletes who are at the top, you can win enough events. You can win 2 singles, you can win 2 doubles,
okay,
and actually you'd be top of the medal table. So
okay.
It's a particular sport and everything else. So it is actually, small nations can be the best Olympic team. I mean, New Zealand, it's a very small nation, and actually they've been the top performing team in ways that they literally had that sort of mentality. So that's perhaps a skewed example. I mean, I like your cycling. That's a very good example. We'll try and stay on the clean side of the line and not question too deeply these things.
That's for a different conversation.
But it was a game changer. They came in effectively with a very clear goal, with the financial backing, with the scientific nous, if I put it that way, found the right athletes, and put the program together that resulted in the most incredible results. Absolutely extraordinary. It was just game changing. To the whole world of cycling, and now the world has caught up with that and is, copying or evolving that. So I think if you were being harsh, your answer about being an LOL champion and the Chinese have got all these advantages, well, okay, if you really want it, then you have to create a structure whereby you're in that environment, learning from them and doing it. Now that's easier to say than do, the practical reality of it, but that's kind of what you'd have to do. You'd set up a talent system whereby you get the players who have the capacity to deal with that. You normally don't get the right ones first up, but they set up the pathway in the system. You'd be traveling them into China. They'd be integrating into the league. They'd be learning the language. They'd be, it would be a full-on package of huge commitment, guarantee at the other end. But that would, enable the starting process of it. How long that would take, and whether it would get the result, but actually that would be a structure that would, at least start your process of challenging them.
Yeah,
it's not easy, but it's exactly that sort of challenge that if people have tried to go to China on boot camps, and I haven't really seen them work that well, in that they haven't managed to actually integrate to the right level, to the right setup. Now that's sort of logistics in a way. Okay, who is the right person there to create that contact and that structure when they're there, the living, the lifestyle, and then finding the right people who can actually deal with it. It's the same traditional sport, and the change from amateur to professional created a huge shift in the people and personalities that were able to do the sport. And that it was then, I am a sportsman. That is my life. This is it. I'm not a policeman who does rugby on the side, or or something else, and that's a very different pressure, and it's a different sort of person that can deal with that pressure. Because when you had something else, a bad day or a bad result on the sports field, or in esport, it was okay, and that you then went back to your day job. But when that's it, it is a very high pressure environment. So if you went off to China for 5 years, whatever it is, that's it. And you're an injury away from the whole thing falling apart, which people don't really recognize in top level sport. You're on that knife edge of pushing and pulling back, pushing and pulling back, um, with potentially nothing to show for it. I have an athlete I coached who was a really nice chap who was the last person not in the Olympics for 2 Olympic cycles. So he spent over 8 years of his life totally committed with effectively nothing to show for something that if he'd been the other side of 1 or 2 seconds, he'd have had a couple of Olympic medals. But actually, he didn't. And there's lots of stories of people like that. And it's, if you don't try, you're never going to make it. But there's a lot of people that stack up below that line. So it's pretty ruthless at the top end.
It's a very brutal kind of thing to commit yourself to, and you do the sacrifices before you know if they're going to all be worth it.
Exactly, which is why it sort of comes back to, you have to enjoy that process. You actually have to enjoy the training, the camaraderie, the playing with your mates, the ups and downs, the great days, the road trips, the everything else. Meeting people online, the environment that you create has to be part of that process, because otherwise it's a miserable existence if you're not. And some people get that right and wrong, and better and worse, but that to me is really key.
Enjoying it, and also something you mentioned before, you have to have a clear why, and you have to find the why.
Exactly.
How do you actually do that? So if again we stick with the example of the Swiss National Federation system, coming into that, when you're setting up something new or you're going into an organization, I try and make sure that I'm trying to keep it as useful as possible for people listening. If they're coming into a kind of newer organization who wants to set up a new structure, because often it's hard to actually know even your own why, and it does take time to sort of really drill deep into it. So do you have kind of advice on how, you're in a new structure that wants to win the league, whatever the league you're in is, and they want to win because they like the game? Like, how do you get anything beyond that?
You start to, I think that I wouldn't go and say, well, what's your why? Because that's very confrontational, and you want to create a relationship that where it comes out almost sort of organically, because a lot of people, you don't know. Oh, I quite like doing this, or I've always been good at it, or and it's only through the steps on the way to reaching your goal that starts to come out, because you then start to put the stress on through training and practice that then exposes whether the why is strong enough. So I think it's almost turning that round to finding out through having to do the appropriate practice and training and everything else. And very quickly it tends to be, when you go to an organization, that you have the people who've sort of been there too long, and when you start to put pressure into that why, actually they're the ones that evolve out, and you get the newer blood that comes in that has a much stronger why. So I think, to me, it's a fairly organic process of, okay, you want to win the league, or to do that, these are the things we need to put in place, as in, it can be training hours, or it can be intensity, or the sort of the program, if you like. And then quite quickly you'll see who thrives in that and who actually doesn't, and then sort of moves on. So there's so many different whys and motivations. I think to try and pigeonhole people into what's your why is not really going to work. I don't think you get much of an answer. And certainly it is a conversation you can have down the route, but it's more a conversation than a what is. And you start to, as a good coach, you start to find that, and then you if you like, have another set of buttons, because you can start to, it's not the best word, manipulate that as a coach to create an environment whereby that why is strengthened.
Mm.
Um, so I think perhaps that's the way I'd look at it, is to, you want to win the league, okay, well, here are the steps. We buy into these steps. Actually, now the reality is who is going to do them, and not just tick the box, but actually do them well, and then do them better than anybody else. And by that process, I think you quite quickly see the strength of the whys.
Mm. And so you have to be patient and attentive, I guess. So not just you've been there for ages, but you see how it's affecting people when this pressure comes on.
Yes, exactly that. And it's not you're trying to burn people and kick them out, but you're being realistic about what is necessary to achieve the goal.
Mm.
And there's nothing bad or wrong about people saying, well, actually, this is not for me, and it's okay. Well, top end sport is certainly not for everybody. It's as we said, it's pretty grim at times, And of course, there's massive highs, but with the massive highs, you come, some big bumps, um, and that's when you need the the coach effectively to be able to tap into the whys to hold the whole thing on track. And I think that's quite key.
Mm. And we mentioned a few times that you have the goal and then you lay out the steps that are needed to achieve the goal. How do you know or find out what is necessary to achieve the goal?
Well, that's an interesting one in esport, because that's something that hasn't developed over time. And in traditional sport, relatively, you there's books, if you like, there's people, there's history, there's experience, there's everything else. So at the moment, it's certainly the best coaches have got the best knowledge of that, and a way to actually see if that's happening. So as a coach, you've got a sort of a number of tools. You've got volume, you've got intensity, and you've got rest. It's kind of your basic blocks of how to train people. Now, how you measure those in esport is a challenge, because we can all say we're playing for 10, 12 hours a day, but sitting in front of your screen 10, 12 hours a day you're not going to get any better. You get tired and bored and demotivated. Um, so we get into this idea of purposeful practice. Actually, is what you're doing making you a better player? And then the question is, well, how do I know if I'm a better player? Now, I've had very, very few esport players actually turn that round and ask me. It's always been the coach has been pushing. It's like, well, okay, you tell me you've done 5 hours, and are you any better? Well, yeah, I've done 5 hours. It's like, well, yeah. So what? What have you actually done? So that's been a big step that I'd say I've done relatively well working with the coaches I've been working with, is to get that mindset change of actually being able to record and find a method of monitoring, is what you're doing working. And there's not an easy way to that at the moment. I'm actually doing some things that looking at cognitive load and that side of things. In traditional sport, the easiest one is you have a pulse meter at a very basic level, and you can see have you stressed the physiology and is overstressed and recovering and that side of things, which doesn't really work with esport in the same way, and that you haven't got the same physiological parameters, if you like. Okay, you do get elevated pulse rates, but it's not the same. So cracking that one as an easy way to monitor things. Sleep is quite a good one, new overloading the system. And that's the talent of a coach, is to be able to balance that overload, which is what you need to do to create a reaction, to create an improved performance. But it's more monitoring the recovery process when that reaction is happening. And certainly as a coach, that's to me the more skillful bit. Anyone can smash a person. You can just put more and more on the program and you destroy them, and it's like, well, I told you to do loads and you couldn't do it. It's actually, how do you pull back? When do you the power of doing less, I think, is really key to being a good coach. The go-to tends to be do more or practice harder. We'll do some more. We'll do more. And actually, I find the best coach is the one who say, well, actually, no, tomorrow we're having off. or tomorrow we're going to go for a walk, or tomorrow we're going to do something different. So what do you mean? I want to do more. I haven't got it right yet. It's okay. Well, just stop. We're going to step back. And that to me is the best coaches have that. Have got the eye to know when to do less. And I think that's a very takes experience and confidence, because it's not anyone's go-to. It's diving harder and do an extra hour. But it's I think you picked up a very key point to me of where esport needs to evolve most, is that capacity to actually monitor, is what you're doing working. And it's every game changes so fast. This latest League of Legends, it's been a huge change, isn't it, in the whole meta and the patch and everything. And suddenly the good players are going, well, hang on, this is it's gone, and what do I do? And it's been a big reset of people having to relearn stuff around that. And it's the capacity of the coach, who can get that done quickest and get the players to buy into that quickest, that actually it's an opportunity and a challenge rather than something that's a disaster for them, that are going to succeed best. But how do you know if you're doing that? And that to me is a really key question to esport coaches, in a very tough way, I guess, sort of justify what you're doing. And as a performance director, that's a lot of the question. Is like, well, okay, you're watching them play. What are you enabling? What are they actually learning? And I think that's an area where, well, there's a lot of work to do and a lot of coaching development to happen.
And I think, you touched on it there. If you were to suggest, okay, tomorrow we're going to just go for a walk or something, I think one of the other things that makes it so hard for coaches to do that, even if they wanted to, is a lot of the way we judge coaching is we simply, because we don't have these good measurements, we simply look at the best team and what they're doing, and therefore we do that. And so as soon as the best team starts to take recovery seriously, now everyone else is allowed to. And I've seen this happen over and over.
But the best team is quite often the best because they've learned how to do a bigger volume. They can actually train well for 5 hours a day, 6 hours, whatever it is. But that has taken time to develop that capacity to do it. So it then becomes very tricky in that because they can work very hard for, say, 6 hours, they then can actually take a day off or do rest properly because they need it. Whereas what you then tend to find is people say, "Oh, look, they're taking days off," and you end up with people taking the days off without doing the work. So it's you need to be very careful as a coach taking other people's training programs. There's a East German chap who came over and took over British rowing, and he was incredibly successful, or is. He's still coaching. He's won an Olympic gold medal at every Olympics since the 70s. And just extraordinary capacity to adapt to what's in front of him. And he was always very open. You could see his training program. No problem, because he knew that it wasn't what was written on the bit of paper, it was how you did it and how you translated that to the athletes in front of you. So getting hold of a Chinese program, great, but it's how do you implement that to a Western team? How do you implement that to players who aren't used to doing or haven't got the capacity yet to do the 8, 9, 12 hours? You hear stories of the Korean camps, but culturally they've learned how to do that. It's not that you can't do it, but you have to take the steps to get to that stage. We always have a bit of a joke that you can pick up all sorts of training programs, and basically you could end up with a rest day every day of the week. I'm in this program today, I'm in that program today, and it's like I'm following all these programs. It's fine, but in the end, you have to find that balance of work to rest, and again, that's a coaching skill of knowing when to push and knowing when to back off, and that's a real fundamental of being a good coach. How hard can you push? And at the higher level, you're always just trying to find that edge of collapse, if you like, or injury, or pushing them over, and it's how brave are you, and what time of the season, and what are you trying to achieve, to how hard you push over that edge, and when do you pull back. And pushing them over is easy. Knowing when to come back is the skill and around that.
Definitely. I mean, I think so many of the steps you're talking about are just so crucial and so missed at the moment. I mean, I heard a League of Legends coach talking recently, saying that when they go to the World Championship, they then scrim, they do their practice, they do as much as the Eastern teams, because suddenly the Eastern teams are there. And I think it's because of two reasons. Firstly, because they're the best teams, therefore we're just going to copy them, which, like you say, already is a problem. And secondly, because the only way we can practice, at least in League of Legends, is with someone else, with another team. You don't have the option to scrim for 12 hours a day in Europe because no one else does it. And he was saying he's been multiple times, but is only now sort of starting to think, like, this makes us just so much worse when we're playing. Suddenly we're doing a month of twice the load as normal, while the performance is most important and the development is almost least important. Like by the time you get to the World Championship, now it's about kind of maintaining. And I always say, as the example, it's obviously a bit more extreme, but before the World Cup final, for example, in that last week in rugby teams, they'll do either no training or like one training thing, because it's like the development has to be done by the time we're at that stage, and now it's just about balancing performance.
And I think, there's some very nice examples, and how in traditional sport we call it tapering, how you taper, but you have to have done the work and capacity to have something to taper from. So you have to create that environment whereby they are stressed, they do need rest, they do need that tiredness, and then the way the body works is you get this bounce. So actually you sort of go down, but then the curve goes back up higher than it was before, if it's working at a very simple level. But yes, exactly that. And the temptation of coaches to arrive at an event and go, right, now we can really push on. It's too much too late, and it's going to have a very detrimental effect. And there's a sudden element of panic, if almost, and we've got to do more. Whereas actually that was the way you should have been working 1 month, whatever it is, on your periodization cycle. And I think it's easy to sit here and talk about it. We've got 20-30 years experience of getting it wrong and right, but for esport coaches trying to basically sort of been ex-players as a general point and done it by just playing, it is a trickier learning. Actually, how do you periodize an esport program? Well, I think that's where traditional sport people have an intuitive feel that isn't yet intuitive from the majority of esport coaches.
So other than experience, if someone was listening to this and thinking, like, that sounds amazing, but I don't know how to actually do this in practice, how would you sort of schedule a program with the idea of making sure it's appropriate for the timescale that you've actually got? Because again, as an example from League of Legends, which of course where most of my examples come from, the competitive schedule completely changed. Now it's in the second year, so a year and a bit ago. And yet, from what I know from talking to people who are inside, and also even what they share publicly, none of the training programs changed. So it used to be that we had 10 weeks, and now we've got 3. You have to be the top 8 after 3 weeks, otherwise you're knocked out already. And no, wait, it wasn't 10, sorry, it was even like 18 weeks. You double round robin and you go slower. And yet the way that like I said, the training programs haven't changed. So how would you said there, you have a lot of experience, of course, but is there some sort of takeaways that you could, if you could have given yourself advice at the beginning, how would you start to get as good as possible at this as quickly as possible, how you'd actually schedule these training programs?
I think on different levels. So one is, as a coach, you need to know your players, know your athletes, and very quickly, sounds a bit cliche, but you can literally look them in the eye and you'll know, are they on form or off form that day, because you know them that well. You've seen you've seen them. So that gives you an intuitive starter. Are they on the edge? Are they performing? And then obviously in game, you're seeing they're making mistakes they don't normally make. That's a good pointer for There's the frustration coming out in a way that doesn't normally. They getting upset over things that they wouldn't normally. You're getting little signs and signals that you've gone over the edge of their capacity, and so that's an area to step back, just as a sort of very basic level sign. Um, it's something that's, again, esport coaches aren't very, well, if I put it bluntly, aren't very good at. It is keeping a training diary. Actually, even in very, very basic level, how many games, how many scrims have you played? And just looking back at that, very quickly you can plot a graph of actually your volume. And volume is a very, very basic measure. It doesn't really show, but it's a starting point. And then what we've been doing, the teams I've been working with, is looking at ways to actually see the level of those scrims and trying to actually put those into a, if you like, hard, medium, and easy at a very basic structure, and that then gives you an idea of intensity, and then you can actually build into that. Is it a practice scrim whereby you're just practicing something you've been working on? Is it a must-win scrim where you're saying actually you were practicing a tournament scenario whereby you do a warm-up and you'd set up the sort of pressure and try and create a mini tournament environment? Or is it a sort of we don't care scrim, just go and do some hours on the server? And you've got different variations around that. So that then is creating levers, if you like, whereby you can monitor and manipulate how hard is a very emotive word, people are practicing and training. So at a pretty easy level, you've then got some tools as a coach you can use to create a periodization around that. So once you've got that, you then need to put you've got your 10 days or your serious block. You then work back from that in blocks. And which block can you really go for it, as in massive volume? We're just going to work and work and work and work. How much time do you need for recovery? How much time do you then need to get them back up? And then you can start to see a structure to your planning. So that's sort of the basic how I look at it. It's, again, it's not a genius rocket science, but it's trying to find the levers to manipulate, and that seems to be at a fairly basic level, relatively easy for esport coaches and systems to do. So you're manipulating volume, you're playing to a degree on intensity, as in what are you actually trying to achieve in that volume, and then you can balance that to your end goal and date. At some point, somewhere before you get to the end point, you have to have done a phrase it in a monster grind session. You've got to have got that period in where it's you set up the environment and we're just going to work hard, and it's what can we get out of that? And within that, you've then got mini cycle and everything around that. And once you've got that block behind you, you then have a lot more freedom and capacity to actually sort of play. But without that hard work time, you're always, you said before, playing on sand as opposed to a solid foundation.
And I think one of the things that we really don't do, I mean, you're saying there like it's not rocket science, but I still think it's incredibly useful to even just consider it as a first step.
Oh. Yeah, well, again, it's something that in traditional sport is now relatively intuitive, and it is just in the cultures, and it's something that is needs to come into esport because players are now professional. That's not new, and they need looking after, and we can't be particularly in the a bit generic to say that the numbers in the East mean they can be less precious about their assets. An organization is investing in an asset, and we need to be able to show the organization as coaches that we're looking after that asset and that asset is developing. And if we just start smashing them, well, as A, we're not going to get any more, and B, it's very expensive to do that. So finding a way whereby we're getting the best from, it's a terrible way to talk about people, but as assets to create a result for the organization, we need to be able to, well, yes, we need to be able to justify that. Why are they getting injured? And equally, why aren't they getting injured? If everyone is always happy and never injured and always on track, it's like, well, are you pushing hard enough? It works both ways. And as a top athlete or player in anything, as I said before, you are always on that edge. And that's okay, if you like, where you need the more support. The harder you're pushing to that edge, okay, that's when you do actually need to start get a physio. Then you do look at a nutritionist. Then you do look at these biomechanics, mechanists, and these other areas, because they're extending where the edge is, if you like, or if you've gone over, they're getting them back quicker, and that's when these things can actually justify themselves.
And I think it sort of ties back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of the goal, maybe not the long-term goal, but another thing that I think is completely missed in esports is that because organizations are less clear about what they're exactly there to do and what their goal is, we almost all act like the point that we're trying to peak is the same. Where
Yep.
if we take this League of Legends as an example, if you're a new team to the league, which has just happened, or you're the team that is spending the least, then you can't be trying to peak for the final because you're
This is it. Yeah.
not going to get there.
I mean, that ties in very nicely. We go back to Switzerland again when we first started. The peak was to make the B final, which is the top 12, and that you had to create a periodization whereby your best race was to get into that. Whereas the people who were serious about winning, they were peaking for the last race of the A final. And it's a very different environment. Now, what you need then is to make sure the organization is aligned with that, in that actually coming, whatever it was, if we talk rowing, coming 11th, and sort of back end of there's 6 in each final. A final is 6 boats, and the next one is 6 boats. That was the first step, and you'd peaked for that. And if the organisation is then not aligned with that, then you have problems. But it's getting alignment with the coach, the players, and the organisation. Now you've picked up on a little bit. What is the organisation's why? And it's balancing a very heavy commercial reality in esport. They're not government funded. There isn't the lottery that we have in the UK that funds a lot of traditional sport. So it is a commercial operation, and so there is not different, but there is a stress and an environment there whereby you need to get results. Traditional sport, I'm lumping it all together, has become so much more is professional. So as a coach, you don't get results and you have to go. It's pretty brutal with that. But esports still has this slight sort of juxtaposition of they don't quite admit it. Actually, we need to win for our sponsors, or equally we need to actually create social media noise for our sponsors, which again creates a whole nother area of pressure and time and results and everything else. Because the org needs that to survive, to pay the players and everything else, and it is all tied together. So, sport and commercial reality is tricky, and how you balance those two.
I think it's such a good way to think about it is that we're almost scared to admit it in esports. And I mean, an example that always sticks in my mind is last year, the team that came 10th in the first 2 competitions, in their own content, they admitted, coming into the first week of the 3rd competition of the year, we're playing against 3 teams, the 8th place team, the 5th place team, and the best team. And we did all our prep for the best team. And it just so struck me as, okay, when we're all doing this as volunteers, sure, prep for the best team, because it's fun to beat the best team. But this is a job. You can't you can't do it like that. So they ended up losing all 3 games rather than maybe targeting one that's actually winnable.
Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier on. It's sort of pick your event, pick your target, and enjoy the process of that. Around that. So I think that's quite, it's a nice analogy you've put in there.
So you mentioned with alignment, getting aligned with players as well. This has always been one that I've been sort of unsure of, because I completely believe in this idea of, we should be targeted and a bit more realistic in terms of, for this split, what is actually our goal, again, so that we can make a training program. But I'd never thought of the idea of even talking about it with the players as well. So, for example, in this Swiss system, are you telling the athletes, top 12 is what we're aiming for, or do they still have to believe that it's going for the top?
It depends very much on who you've got, who you're actually dealing with, their maturity, their experience, their age, how long they've been trying, how long they haven't made it for, around that. But I think, my coaching style, I think if you're not honest, that doesn't mean you have to be brutal, but you do have to find a way to be honest, and that's what I expect back, and then you have a foundation to work forward. So I think, in a nice way, under promise and over deliver is always a good way to be working in sport. So I think in the example you used, no, I wouldn't, well, it's promise winning, because it's not, it misaligns everything. It's not truthful. It's not where you're going to be, and that creates disappointment, and it's not that it's bad to be disappointed, but it's unrealistic. And I think you have to be realistic. Okay, what have we got? If we overperform, we're looking at this, which is fantastic. Underperformance is this, but this is actually, from what we've seen, this is our level. And how do we? The key is then to show players and athletes or anybody the steps to move on from that level. That's the real skill, is not to say, well, this is where you are. It's okay, this is where we are, but this is how we move on. This is the plan. Here's our vision. And then there's, okay, an acceptance. Oh, this is where I am now. I've done better or worse than that, but this is what I'm going to do next. And then you get that forward-moving excitement.
So all that, I think, is incredibly useful for people who are coming in and looking to sort of set up a structure. So the next thing that I'd like to touch on, you mentioned after Switzerland, you go to Australia, somewhere with a kind of bigger structure already and a bigger budget. Is that fair?
Yeah, very much.
Yeah. So what are the dangers or the pitfalls there from your experience? So a lot of people have this as well, rather than coming into a new team where you have to go through all these processes, you come into a bigger team, maybe they're a bit clearer on what they want, but also they've got all the money that you could need. This has been a problem in esports too.
So that's your question, sort of.
What's the positives and minuses of coming into somewhere like Australia where they have a much bigger program?
So in many ways, it's easier in that you then have this support structure already in place. Support structure with a lot of very impressive support structure. The issues are then faced with is you have to manage that whole support structure. And each part of that support structure has its own why, if we go back to that, its own egos and its own issues, and it has to justify itself to maintain its position in that, which can create a very difficult to manage beast. Suddenly, rather than a boat, a dinghy you can flip around, you're looking more at a super tanker that you have to try and turn. So you can be far less nimble, and that was something, I don't know if I got quite right, but it was certainly something quite. It was very good in many ways, and you had a lot of resource, people to talk to and ideas, and you could bounce them around. But in the end, you can't lose control as the coach. Examples of an athlete or a player says, "Oh, the physio says I should do it like this," and once you get that, it's a lot of red flags and alarm bells. Like, well, actually, no. Who's running the program, whose head's on the block. In the end, obviously, you don't say that to the player, but actually, that then needs a very different management style. So, in some ways, careful what you wish for. But equally, when it works, it's tremendous. You have a fantastic support system. The player or the athlete feels very supported in any way. If they have a problem, if you've got it working right, they know who to go to. They're not sleeping there. There's somebody who can help. They're not eating. They're weight loss, weight gain, or whatever it is. You have all these amazing resources to help. But going back to what we said before, is you have to make sure you're not losing sight of your fundamentals. What do you actually have to do to be good at your sport? Esport, you have to spend that time and capacity of basically in front of the screen working hard. You have to do that, and until you're doing that, having the bells and whistles doesn't add value. It's not necessary. Nice to have, but does it add value? And that as a coach is something you need to really keep an eye on. I think with the bigger system, I mean, the easy one is you can use the Rocky thing. You've got your small hardcore with a mission, and if the world's against us, how are we going to prove it? Which is a lovely motivation to work with as a coach. It's very okay. This is us against the world, and what can we do? Which is a fun area to coach in, and you step into, I guess, a very entitled. We are who we are, so we'll win sort of environment, and creating the right attitude and pressure in that environment is a different set of skills. It's not easy. It wasn't certainly something I wasn't so comfortable with, and that it was, the whys were quite different and harder to work with around that.
And
in many ways, it's not easy. I think it's.
Sorry, I think the connection went a bit. I didn't mean to interrupt you. What I was going to say is, if you're coming into a structure and they haven't done that step of justifying the upgrade, like you talked about before, and there is all this there's all this baggage. You don't know if it's excess baggage or not.
Yeah.
Would you strip it back and then kind of add things back in? Or, I mean, that's really, well, we talked about the brutal side of high performance before. That's kind of very, very brutal as well. Like, how do you work out if each of these parts are justified?
I think piece by piece. What are the results? An easy one to me is, there's a lot of very good physios. I don't mean to bash physios, but actually, how many training days have I lost? Well, every training day I've lost, it's like, okay, well, physio, why was that a training day? What was missing there? And sort of turn it round, as opposed to, I got them fixed. It's like, well, how many days weren't they fixed for? And obviously the environment has to be right to go down that sort of conversation. But it's really aligning the support team with the goal, as opposed to them. It's sounding a bit sort of bash the support team this, but it's not. But we all have to justify what we're doing in the end. Okay, to say, well, no one got injured, it's all great. It's like, well, okay, no one got injured, but they didn't win anything because they were all not training hard enough. So it's finding that balance and the buy-in and the right people. And I think once you start to set your culture, and it's finding the people who will buy into that culture, and the confidence that actually this is the way we're going to go. I think quite quickly people will leave or join depending on that. Conflict with your support team is incredibly destructive. That's really, it just destroys everything you're trying to work. So I think that's something that you have to be very aware and careful of. Whispering around the back and things is absolutely devastating for an organisation and a team. You have to get that buy-in that whoever it is, whether it's the nutritionist, is on board with effectively how hard you need to push the players to get the result you need to. Once whoever it is starts saying, "Oh, they're very tired, I think it's too hard," the moment they say that to a player, boof, it's gone. You've really lost it. They can come and say that to you and say, "Look, when you're crucifying them, I think they're on the edge. You're going to lose them." It's okay. Well, let's have a look at why do you think that? Then it's a very good conversation. But it's creating that that communication, that trust, that buy into to what you're trying to do, then it can be a very strong thing in that the player can't hide, if you like. They're being, when they go and see the support person, they say, well, actually, shut up and get on with it. You're soft and whatever it is. And actually, what do you mean? I came here for a little shoulder to cry on. It's actually, it can be very good. But unifying that message I think that's perhaps the answer. Being able to unify that message from the whole team, as in the support team, is really key.
It's good to hear that that's a problem in sport as well, because I thought that was just a problem in esports. We always used to say, especially when we were doing this in a gaming house, 2 coaches and a manager, and we always used to say it's kind of like little kids who go to mum and ask for a chocolate, and she says no,
Yeah,
so then they go
no,
to dad and ask him,
exactly.
see if
Yeah,
they
but
can
Dad
get
said I
something else.
could. Very
Yeah.
much. It's normal human nature. But obviously, when you've got a big support structure, you are as a coach, running a support structure, and it's important not to lose that. You can spend all your time running that as opposed to the sessions, and sometimes that's okay. You have an assistant coach or whatever, and it's working, but it's quite quickly as a coach you can step away from that. Um, one-on-one time with your players. If you've moved from Mixar Sports, from Rocky to Manchester United, you've got a very different dynamic and expectation and support team and everything else. And some coaches can't make that change; it doesn't fit them, and others thrive in the other environment.
Mm. I think actually, I mean, because my background is in film, I would also hadn't tied this together before, but say the same thing about directors. There's directors who are incredible indie directors who make a series of amazing films, are very praised, and then they get a big budget, and suddenly it's, at best it's boring and mundane, but often it's just a complete disaster because it's
Exactly.
yeah. The more people you have, the more of your time becomes about management. And that's fine as long as you know that and as long as you're up for that. But we see people who have been a solo coach for a long time and then move into an organization and with a load of money, and they're like, oh, great, I'll have like 3 or 4 people. But if you want to spend the whole time doing the sessions with the players, then maybe you can't have that many people because you will just lose track of them.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the transitions I made from a coach to performance director. Actually, then you manage that environment. So are you getting best out of the talents you've got? So you've got a coach who's an amazing solo coach. Don't then put them in charge of a team of 10 of other coaches. Again, it's managing your assets, and your film example is very nice. One man and his camera in the jungle making an amazing film is not going to have a team of 50 and the whole setup and be able to run it the same. Why do you want to put them in that place? So I think exactly right with that. But that's to me whether it is the CGO or the one of the senior leadership team of the org has got it wrong. If you're hiring a coach for that, make sure they're able to do that. Maybe you add some strings, but don't lose that bit that you hired them for.
Is it in sport as well? Is it because one of the things that comes to mind, although personally it's not me, but I was talking to someone recently who said something like every assistant coach wants to be a head coach, and just sort of said that in passing. And of course, head coach, I mean, especially in esports, has a lot more kind of glamour to it. But is that something that is aligns with your experience and the idea of having someone who was a great head coach when they were a solo coach, moving them into a bigger structure and suddenly bringing in someone else to be the head coach or whatever you decide to call it? They might see that as a demotion and they've done well before. So is that something that you've seen to be the case outside of esport as well? And if so, how would you deal with it?
Yes, it depends on the size of the organization, doesn't it? Being an assistant coach at one of the monster football clubs is very different to being the head coach at a local, a local cycling club. Running Team Sky or running, the 10 lads from the pub at the weekend. It's a very different setup. So, it is titles, and we do get stressed about what we're called and that side of things. But I think to say every assistant coach wants to be the head coach, I don't think that's true. There are a lot of, to me, you talked a fair bit about stepping into an organization. To me, one of the keys is to find who is the real worker, who's the one who actually gets it done, as opposed to things happen. And when you find that person, then you have a big start in how the organization works. And quite often is the assistant coach, that lumping the role a little bit, it's that person actually who knows the intricacies of the org and how it works. And to me, listening to them is one of the key points to making it work. You can walk in with your great ideas and supervision and everything else, but until you've had that conversation and find out who actually makes the wheels turn, they'll tend to have been there for some time, and they have a fount of knowledge that is just absolutely key, because they'll have seen, bright young things come and go with wonderful ideas, and here we go, here's another one. And unless you get them on side, it's very tricky. So I think, people are very happy in that environment. They don't have their head above the parapet. They're not the one being shot at, and they can work away and create that environment and do an amazing job that is essential to any success that the high profile head coach is going to have. So I certainly wouldn't say everyone does. Certainly some do. It's a stepping stone and en route. But I think to say everyone, I really wouldn't agree with that. Some people are much happier working without that title, and I think work better for it. There isn't that. You have to answer to the press. You have to go and sit on the board meetings. You have to go and look at the budgets. Actually just let me coach. And when you find those people, are really key to any org. Who actually greases the wheels that makes the whole thing work. And those, every organization has them, and to me they are the key players as a head coach that you have to create a relationship and environment with to have any chance of succeeding.
And I think in esport, one of the problems with it is that so often the role clarity just isn't really there. So the reason that a lot of people who are not the head coach want to be the head coach is, I would say, because they don't have an area that they're sort of truly responsible for, and they feel like they're just sort of helping out in different areas rather than accepting that the head coach does have to do all these extra things and does have to manage all these extra people, then actually you get to do more of the coaching and stuff like that.
Role clarity, I think, is something that to me in sport is a slightly tricky one, in that you need people who are just going to get it done. And once you start in any sound of, well, that's not my job, very quickly it's not going to work. So yes, there is role clarity, but in the end you're dealing with people, and I think that's really key. There has to be an understanding that this is your title, but the role is to make it work however we do it. We were joking before, as the performance director, you're still trying to sort out the wrong size shirts. It's okay, it can be somebody else's job, but actually you just need to do it. And I think in any sports organization where the lines are too hard, you're all siloed into my role, your role. Yes, you have to understand it, but actually to make sport teams work, you have to roll your sleeves up, and however glamorous your title of head coach and performance director, whatever it wants to be, the moment you stop that, I think it's gone.
It's like if the lines are too hard, things fall through the cracks, I guess.
Yes, if you like.
So I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move to the quickfire questions, which I'm asking everybody. Partly just a nice way to end, but also one of the things that I want to do with this podcast is show how diverse the backgrounds are of people who are now in this position. So who are the coaches that you look up to or idolize, either now or early on in your career when you were an athlete yourself?
Look up to? It's probably the East German coach I mentioned before, a chap called Jürgen Grobler, just for his ability to evolve and coach what was in front of him. His results are extraordinary. With that, slightly off the well, but perhaps for an esport. I think the current your your viewership's going to suddenly plummet even more if I say the England cricket coaches. Sorry, everybody, but I think the way they've changed the environment, for the effectively the same players to actually come in and allow players to play, that has been very impressive. People who don't know, the England cricket team was something we all struggle with being English, and they've got very stuck and very, if I could be rude, constipated about how they play. And actually, they've got a new New Zealand coach, and he has allowed them the freedom to express themselves. And I think to allow your players to express themselves, but within a structure. And we have a phrase, you need a structure that can bend but not break. And that flexibility and confidence to actually go and show what you can do, I think as a coach is really key. Show what you can do, and then we know where we are, and then we can work on it. So I think probably a sort of current one would be that. And I think sort of the other side of that, if you like, is talking English sport, is English rugby, which is stuck in a horrible rut of very talented players who just aren't playing, and it's awful to see. They talent and training and every bell and whistle you could possibly want, but they've forgotten how to play, how to actually do the game. And I think when you lose sight of that in any sport, then you need that release somewhere, and a coach or facilitator to enable that to happen is really key.
What's the biggest hardship you've experienced as a coach?
I thought about this a little bit. I think it's probably the really understanding what you've done to everyone around you. Being a coach, okay, you're not the actual player and the athlete, but it is very selfish. You are giving a lot of yourself, not all yourself, to a goal and a target, and rely on others, if you like, to actually perform on the day. And the knockback on friends, on family, on everything else that you're away on training camps and without getting the violins out, missing birthdays and all the rest of it. I think it does hit you, when you're young and it's exciting, but as you develop in a sort of more stabilized career in it, I think the hardship actually of realizing what other people suffer with, if you like, around you, haven't bought into being a coach, I think it is quite tough at times. I think that sort of whole, the implications around you of what you're doing to be a top coach.
And what's your top highlight as a coach?
I think it wasn't a winning result, but it was a lad who'd been at it for a very long time, 12, 15 years, and never made it. And we found a way to change the way he was approaching things, that it clicked, and he actually got a medal at the World Championships. And I think seeing someone achieve something they didn't really believe they could have when they started, and had sort of given up, and enabling that change of attitude and atmosphere through the culture and the environment we created, I think was great. That was super satisfying. And I guess the easy one is seeing sort of 13, 14-year-olds develop to be standing on Olympic podiums. That growth through, and becoming from child to youth to man to best in the world is great fun to see. It's you have these moments in sport which are wonderful, and you kind of lose some of the shit they went through to get there.
What are 3 non-negotiable behaviours that people around you need to buy into?
We touched on it before. I think honesty is really key. If you have that, I guess honesty and trust are probably 2, and the 2 to me are tied very closely together. When you to be a coach, you have to create an environment where you can call it out. And when you don't, it's the thin end of problems coming down the line. So I think honesty and trust are sort of the 2 key ones. And I guess you have to have 3 is actually really committing to something, not sort of saying it but doing it. It's all getting a bit cliched, isn't it? But actually we're really doing it. It's very easy to say, and sort of pretend, but actually putting yourself 100% on the line and failing. That's sport. Most of the time, there's only one winner. But I think with those three things, then then you have the capacity to do amazing stuff.
And last question then, if you from today could give yourself one piece of advice when you first started your coaching journey, what would it be?
I think it would be not to compromise on what I know is right. And when I've sort of been forced into a corner and have sort of gone, oh, it'll be okay, it's never has been. And I think to really take the time and learn what the principles are that you have to stick to, and then you have a something to work from. I think as compromise in top level sport doesn't in the end doesn't work. You have to be honest, and you have to trust yourself, and then you have to commit to 100%. So I think it would be that the times where it's just, well, it'll be okay, and just and holding yourself to that level is the real level. In you have your off season, whatever, and as soon as you finish the world championships, whatever it is, with as a coach, and your eye is absolutely on the money, you can see what the level is. And through the training period, it starts to slip a little bit, and you start, it's okay, and you have to sort of force yourself back up to that eye you had. You just watch the LOL World Championships, and boom, these Chinese are absolutely knocking it out of the park. It is amazing. And by the time you've watched 6 months of a good Western team, you think, oh, that's actually quite good, that's not bad, and you have to just get yourself back to go, no, boom, that is what people can do and are doing. And I think sort of being able to maintain that level and not compromising of, you want to be the best in the world, well, that is the level. And we can do lots of other stuff that's great fun that isn't that, but if you want that, that's where it is. And I think that's probably a long answer to a short question.
No, I think that's fantastic advice, and ties back into the commitment thing you were talking about before, and being really committed to what you believe, and being really committed to your ideas and what you think is right as well. Well,
I think so.
Well, thank you very much for coming. It was really, really good conversation, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. All right.